President Donald Trump is now reeling from what was clearly his worst week as president, which is quite a low point for a man who's lived through a steady march of scandals, indictments, and convictions of people around him. But this week marked a rebuke by the majority, a rebuke that the majority of presidents have never faced, a full House floor vote teeing up impeachment. Now, why is this time different? One reason is the evidence. Unlike allegations of self-dealing or hush payments or obstruction in the Mueller probe, the simple facts at the center of this Ukraine bribery plot are not in dispute. Trump demanded a foreign government go after Joe Biden. Trump admitted it. Trump released notes proving it. Trump said he'd do it again, publicly suggesting other countries go after Biden. And as the evidence mounted, several other Trump officials corroborated everything I just said. That's confirmation from the people who work for him. And that's the evidence that got Congress to this point, teeing up impeachment with these new rules that will bring some of those same witnesses into the public. These are now going to be open hearings as mandated in the new resolution. That's the very thing Republicans had claimed they wanted.
By golly, if they're going to do it in public.
They're trying to impeach a president in secret behind closed doors.
We're going to go and see if we can get inside. Let's see if we can get in.
Let's see if we can get in. Spoiler alert, you can get in. Republicans that you saw on screen there were actually authorized under the old rules to get into those hearings. The new impeachment rules will also let the president in to object to evidence, to cross-examine witnesses. Speaker Pelosi says it's the fairest process any House has ever presented for impeachment.
These rules are fairer than anything that have gone before in terms of an impeachment proceeding.
We turn now to experts who can go in-depth, kicking off our Sunday night special. Harvard's Jennifer Taub, a law professor, author, and expert on white-collar crime. NYU's Melissa Murray, a law professor and former clerk to then-Judge Sotomayor. And from the New York Times Magazine, Emily Bazelon, an author and fellow at Yale Law School. Good evening to all of you. Thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you, Ari.
It's great. I want to start here at the table. Emily, what does it mean procedurally now that you've had the House go forward?
It means that we have this new set of rules. And the most important part of these rules, I think, is that we're going to have these public hearings. We're going to all get to hear and assess for ourselves what these witnesses have to say, what their credibility is like. And the president will have lawyers present, whoever he wants, who can cross-examine those witnesses. And this is the classic way in which we try to establish the truth in a dispute in court in this country.
That's exactly right. And I think, again, the key question here is this is a set of proceedings for the people. So the people will now have the opportunity to hear this evidence. And I think one of the things that's really going to be important here is when they hear this evidence, they're going to understand that a lot of the procedures that were used in this White House were serious deviations from what has come before, that these were career people, career administrators who were alarmed by some of the actions that this White House took with regard to this foreign power. And I think that will bring home what the Democrats are trying to hammer down right now.
Yeah, and Jennifer, when you look at this in the criminal context of things that are alleged that the House is looking at that would be potentially high crimes by the president, sooner or later he has to speak to that. This week seemed to shift his emphasis because he said, well, we got to get off process and defend what I did. Of course, that might be harder than it looks. Here's how he has been defending that. Take a listen.
There was no quid pro quo. There was nothing.
That call was perfect. It couldn't have been nicer.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. Likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens.
You have to ask Rudy those questions. Don't ask me.
I've answered everything. It's a whole hoax. And you know who's playing into the hoax? People like you.
Jennifer, does the House impeachment hearing stage of this process push him and his team past what he's been doing, which are those kind of vague redirects?
You know, I hope so. What we just heard there was clearly impeachable conduct as well as admission to, criminal offense of bribery. But I just want to address what you asked, which is what is his team going to do? And the problem we're facing here is, unfortunately, House Republicans are mistaking their role. They're acting like they are Trump's team, like they're his criminal defense attorneys. And instead, they took an oath to the Constitution of the United States to defend and uphold it against enemies both foreign and domestic. And so Trump needs a real team, and we need the House Republicans to meet the moment and find their courage here, because when the facts come out before the American people, they are not going to look very good. One more thing to say is, those who have worked as the president's personal lawyers before have not fared that well. As we know, Michael Cohen right now is serving out a sentence in federal prison. And we have not heard much from Rudy Giuliani, who seems to be involved in a criminal conspiracy around this Ukraine quid pro quo.
Well, that's
matter.
the question at this point. Does Giuliani look more like a co-defendant than someone who can wage an actual legal defense? Before I lose you, given your work in white-collar crime and your expertise in these areas where things can get complicated, and you say, God, how do you explain to a jury, in this case the Senate would become the jury, and the public who votes for the Senate, what is at issue? What do you see as the clearest, simple case against the president?
I think the clearest case is this. He sought or demanded from a foreign government help to win the election. That help would be what he was seeking, and it's very clear from Bill Taylor and Gordon Sondland's testimony that Donald Trump was seeking the president of Ukraine to make a public announcement on television that he was investigating corruption by Joe Biden. In exchange for that, he was dangling support in the form of military assistance, and he was dangling a face-to-face meeting at the White House. That was a quid pro quo. So that's incredibly corrupt to seek foreign assistance to help you win a presidential election. And it's incredibly corrupt to condition the receipt of money that Congress had already allocated to help this country defend itself against Russia, to condition that upon ginning up a fake corruption scandal that you announce to hurt your opponent. It's pretty clear. And if it sounds familiar, Ari, it sounds a lot like the allegations in the Mueller report, what he did previously. The difference here is when he was seeking Russia's assistance to help him win the 2016 election, he was merely a candidate, not a public official. So previously, what we were looking at is simply campaign finance law violations and then obstruction. Now, added to that, we're looking at bribery. And as you know, the Constitution doesn't require a criminal case, but it just so happens, as you also know, that bribery is one of the specific words mentioned as a grounds for impeachment.
Right, and that goes
bribery.
to what you're talking about from the criminal perspective is, can you point to very simple things and say, this is corrupt, this is a bribe, this is a high crime? Jennifer Taub from Harvard in Boston, thank you so much for joining us. We continue here on set and turning to how this week's House vote tees up a real different kind of lawyering on Capitol Hill. And for that, we welcome a former congressional senior counsel, Tom Rogers, who's been on both sides of high-stakes televised hearings down in Washington, having also served as a senior media executive at TiVo, the publishing giant Prime Media, and NBC. He's also at the sports betting company WinView, where he's currently executive chairman. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
The Congress is not always credited for doing great, clear hearings, true?
Absolutely true.
You've been there as a senior counsel. What is key in your view now that the whole country's been put on notice they're going to do big televised hearings?
You got to remember who you're playing to, and you got to remember who really the ultimate jurors are here. In some sense, of course, the ultimate jurors will be the Senate, but you're not going to get conviction. At best, what you're going to get, and what the Democrats have to hope for, is that they can pull 4 or 5 Republican senators over. And if they can do that, they have a majority of the Senate and a bipartisan vote on that Donald Trump did something for which he should be removed from office.
So that's really interesting. Let me take that to Melissa, because you've been following this so closely with us. Tom's saying something that's a little different than the conventional wisdom, which is, well, you either remove him or you don't. If you don't remove him, then move on. This didn't mean anything. Tom is saying that it's actually significant, I think, constitutionally and obviously politically for the country if Republican senators come along and put down a marker, this was a bribe, this was corrupt.
Again, I think you're exactly right, Tom. We're playing to the people here. So, I mean, again, This is a process where they'll be laying out evidence for the senators, but really for the senators' constituency. So if there are senators in some of these purple districts that might flip, it'll be critically important for them to play to the people. So in turn, those constituencies can turn to their senator and say, listen, I don't think this is kosher anymore. I need you to step in. I need you to do something, or I'm going to actually play this out at the ballot box in November. And I think that's something that they're looking for. And if they can just show that there is some Republican support, that there are Republicans who are willing to put country before party, that will be a huge victory, because I think everyone agrees there is zero chance that we are going to get a supermajority to remove the president.
Well, you said zero. I've heard from some well-connected Republicans, including those who don't always want to say this on air by name, a different word. I heard recently a word that was non-zero. Doesn't mean 50%, doesn't mean 30%, but I heard non-zero, which is striking, because there are people who say, actually, there's more concern there than you know. Tom, I want to put up on the screen something that we've discussed, but that we can go a little deeper in here on our Sunday special, which is the actual clues to how this is going to work. Speaker Pelosi says, and we'll put this up, in contrast to past impeachments, when you look at the copy of the documents, when you look at can you attend evidence and the proceedings? Can you ask questions there, which Nixon's counsel was not allowed to do? They say, hey, straight flush for Trump. Let him in if he wants.
The process arguments that the Republicans will raise are just going to fade away. Up against that, they just cannot hold up as a basis for trying to undo what the House is going to do here. The real issue is going to be not the Democrats presenting their affirmative case, their initial case. It's going to be how they handle the rebuttal, because it's going to come down to the rebuttal. It's not process, but he may have done it. Some may say, OK, he did do it, but it's not impeachable. And how do you come back at that? Because they're basically going to say, look, ultimately Ukraine got the aid. Look, ultimately the president got his meeting. Ultimately he released the transcript. So where's the cover up? And they're going to take it from that position. And how the Democrats come back and rebut that is going to be key. It can't come down to solely this phone call, as bad as this phone call was. But it has to be shown to be a long attempt to put campaign personal issues ahead of the national security of the United States. And in doing so, it comes down to something much broader, much deeper than the simple rebuttal that the Republicans will come back with.
Well, and Emily, isn't that the wildest part about everyone who had said, well, just wait for the next election to deal with Donald Trump? There were more conservatively oriented Democrats who said that on the theory that you don't need to have impeachment running into the Iowa caucus. And there were a lot of other people who liked Donald Trump up to a point and just said, look, if you hate him so much, wait for the election. What Donald Trump did was cancel out that own defense for himself by so blatantly and publicly confessing that his goal here is to get foreign help so there isn't a fair election.
Right. So one huge difference between this impeachment inquiry and the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation was looking backwards at the 2016 election. This is looking forward at an effort to influence the 2020 election. And so, you know, to say, well, it was really just okay, or it doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. And I agree. I think that is where we're going to wind up in the Republicans' defense. The American public's going to have to decide whether they think that's good enough and whether they think that the kind of trade that Jennifer was outlining earlier, aid for helping dig up dirt on your presidential potential opponent, whether that's something they want the president of the United States to be allowed to do, not just now, but in the future, right? Because we're talking about the rules, the standards going forward for presidents of both parties.
And partly, Tom, we're also talking about how the rest of the nation and the culture understands this. Is it, quote unquote, one more Washington set of bickering, which does not move people? Or is it a type of overwhelming evidence that makes people stop, even people who aren't following every piece of the story, and say, is the president a crook? And you think back to the Nixon example, there was a whole period of time, which we're going to actually get into in a little more depth tonight, where Republicans, a lot of the country said, I'm not sure, leave it alone. And then it shifted. And it shifted in the culture. And I don't know if you know, sometimes we dip into the culture here in our reporting. But there was a great little Queens band, the Honey Drippers, who had a song that remains their most famous song. I'm going to play a little bit of it for you. This was long before it happened. They were singing Impeach the President.
Some people say that he's guilty. That he's guilty. Some people say, I don't know. I don't know. Impeach the president. Impeach the president.
Impeach the president. At what point does this go beyond hearings and evidence and become a cultural movement that's plus 50% of Americans saying, let's do something?
Well, the Nixon years are very instructive here because John Dean, although his major testimony was on the Senate investigative hearings before it went over to the House, was able to talk to something very broad. He interacted regularly with Nixon. He was able to talk about his conversations with Nixon regularly. When you're talking about the witnesses here who have all corroborated what actually happened on this phone call, these are not people, for the most part, who interacted broadly with the president. John Bolton is. And John Bolton, if he's going to testify, has that John Dean capability.
Right, to be, hey, you were the president's guy, where are you now? Melissa, any comment on the Honey Drippers?
Well, words fail me. I can't believe you brought that up. I didn't even realize that was their most famous song.
It really is.
By the Sea was their most famous song. But
we'll ask the viewers if people prefer By the Sea.
Well, I want to go back to the Clinton impeachment because I think you're exactly right, Tom. Like, the question is going to be, is this conduct that's impeachable? And we saw that play out in the Clinton context where no one thought that that was really impeachable, that it really was about partisan bickering. But this seems demonstrably different from that kind of misconduct.
We have, I can tell you, we've learned a lot here at this table, as well as Jennifer on remote here, walking us through some of this, people who've really thought through these issues for years. And now tonight, we are upon these issues as a nation. So I want to thank Tom Rogers, Emily Bazelon, and Melissa Murray. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.